board and committee meet monthly to review proposals for changes to properties located within the city's 7 historic districts and buildings designated as local landmarks, as well as to conduct other historic preservation-related business consistent with Article 11 of the Land Development Code. The board is made up of 9 Lakeland citizens appointed by the City Commission and is assisted by staff of the Community and Economic Development Department and the City Attorney's Office. The first meeting comprises the Historic Preservation Board agenda, where business of the board is handled, including recommendations of new historic designations. The second meeting consists of the Design Review Committee agenda and involves acting on recommendations from staff regarding certificate of review applications for major work proposed to properties within the historic districts or landmark buildings. The Design Review Committee is a standing subcommittee of the Historic Preservation Board. Public input is welcomed for items on the Design Review Committee's agenda, and we invite everyone who wishes to participate to be heard. We ask that all speakers come up to the central podium, state their name and address for the record, and be concise in their comments. Thank you for your interest and participation. And please silence all mobile devices at this time. And with that, I will turn the meeting over to our board chair, Mr. Chris Olson.
Thanks, Emily. Let's call to order the October 27th, 2022 meeting, Historic Preservation Board. Do a roll call. Chris Olson, myself, I'm here. Melinda?
Here.
Lynn Dennis?
Here.
Landis Fleming?
Here.
Jeremy Moses?
Here.
Cesar Perez? Absent. Michael Porter? Welcome again. And Michelle Sylvester's not here, and John White? Here. Excellent. We have 6, we have a quorum. So let's see. Were there any questions, edits, or acceptance to the last month's minutes?
Move for approval.
Second.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? All right. Those are approved. For old business, Emily, would you like to give us an update on the resurveying of East and South Lake Morton and the progress on that?
Yes, so this project is well underway. Field work, the actual survey work was done the week of October 10th. They completed it on October 14th, which in my experience surveying historic districts, their technology made the process really quick. So they got that completed in 5 days. And so work now will begin to analyze the data that they collected, that survey data. The next deliverable is, now that the survey work has been complete, is to turn over 200 Florida Master Site File forms to the city to prove that, they are a work in progress. So that will be done by November 4th. And then the next deliverable will be January 13th, and they will turn in the draft survey report to us, as well as the balance of all of the Florida Master Site File forms. And then the fourth and final deliverable will be on March 24th, and that will be the final survey report and recommendations. And then I will come to you with staff recommendations as far as if we need to expand the number of contributing properties within each historic district, if there are any properties outside of, immediately outside of the district boundary that we want to include, that kind of thing. So expect that to occur in April or May of next year. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Have you been pleased with the?
Yes.
Yeah.
Paleo West has been fantastic to work with. They give me weekly updates. They're very communicative and responsive. So.
There is then a possibility of changes to the edges of the district in terms of it getting larger.
Yes, there is that possibility. Of course, that would be a recommendation on the Historic Preservation Board's part to the City Commission to make any changes to that boundary.
Interesting. All right. Any target date for the next district getting surveyed?
So That will be in a future phase. I plan to apply for another state grant in, I think the grant cycle opens in April 2023. So we won't know until August of 2023 if we've gotten that grant. So it would likely not begin until 2024, the next phase. But we do have planned Dixieland and Munn Park to survey next.
All right, very good, thank you. Any new business? All right. Motion to adjourn with no new business?
So move.
Second.
All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? All right, very good. The Historic Preservation Board is adjourned.
We're now opening the City of Lakeland Historic Preservation Board Design Review Committee meeting. I'd like to call to order myself, Melinda Rinker, the chair, present, Chris Olson,
Present.
Lynn Dennis,
Here.
Landis Fleming,
Here.
Jeremy Moses,
Here.
Cesar Perez, absent, and John White.
Here.
We do have a quorum. Let's see. Would like to start with the review and approval of the September 22nd, 2020 meeting minutes. Are there any corrections or additions to the minutes that are needed?
Move for approval.
Second.
It's my
Everybody
job.
seconded. All in favor of the adoption of the September 22nd Design Review Committee meeting minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Seeing none, we shall move on. We're now moving to the review certificates, we're now moving to the review of the certificates of review that were administratively approved between September 15th and October 18th. There are 22 cases. Are there any questions of staff or anything we need to discuss?
Lots of fences.
Lots of fences, yes. I think we're going to see more of that after the hurricane.
Yeah.
Were a lot
That
of
makes sense.
Were a lot of them down because of the hurricane in this particular
Cycle.
set of these?
This would have included, yeah,
Oh, okay.
that time period too, yeah.
Yeah, ours only went a few inches, shockingly. So let's see. Now we're going to consider the certificate of review applications. The public portion of the meeting is now beginning, and the committee is ready to consider them. Hi, good morning. I can get through this, right?
Okay.
Jared Simpson, would you, our Assistant City Attorney, would you administer the oath for all who wish to speak for the public hearing?
If you plan to speak to the board, if you could stand and raise your right hand, we'll put you under oath. You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Okay, our first case is HPB 22-206, which is 716 Mississippi Avenue. Conceptual approval requested for the demolition of certain elements of the existing house at this address, as well as the new construction of building addition onto the front elevation of the house. The owners are Wes and Michelle Graham, applicant Mr. Tony Pagan of Platinum Construction. Let's see. Description. Okay. Are there any conflicts of interest for the committee members? Okay. Emily, would you do the staff report and recommendation, please?
Certainly. Thank you, Madam Chair. So the subject property is an interior lot of record consisting of 0.19 acres. And on this property is a one-story single-family residence built circa 1925 in the frame vernacular architectural style, which is a contributing building in the South Lake Morton Historic District. The frame vernacular styling of this house is expressed by its gable roof, rectangular plan, double hung sash wood windows with a 1/1 light configuration and weatherboard siding. Alterations include modifications to the front porch and small rear additions. The subject property was combined historically with the adjacent property to its south, 718 Mississippi Avenue. In 2010, the subject property was split from 718 Mississippi Avenue, with the accessory building at the rear of 716 Mississippi being recombined with 718 Mississippi in 2016, as the accessory building was built on the shared property line and encroaches into both properties. The current property owners purchased the subject property in 2017. And the images shown are from the Polk County Property Appraiser's Office on the left, and the 1947 Sanborn map of Lakeland on the right. So the subject house has an existing living area of 1,499 square feet. The applicant's request conceptually proposes to remove the rear additions, which are 473 square feet, to make room for a garage and parking area in the future, and also to construct a new addition consisting of 1,153 square feet under roof onto the front elevation, which will comprise living space and a new front porch. And the new total area of the house under roof will be 2,428 square feet. The new front porch will have a front gabled roof supported by tapered columns on plinths with knee walls. And please note that these elevation drawings are very conceptual. That's why there's no windows shown. Materials for the addition include a raised foundation to match the existing, wood or hardy lap siding, window trim to match the existing, vinyl windows, and an architectural shingle roof to match the existing. The site plan for the proposed addition shows building setbacks that comply with the urban form standards in the Land Development Code. And this request was evaluated using the standards and guidelines referenced here. In evaluating the request with the standards and design guidelines, staff finds that the requested removal of the rear additions does not disturb the spatial relationships that characterize the neighborhood, and that the essential form and integrity of the subject house is maintained. The treatment of the rear elevation wall following the removal of the additions, as well as all materials proposed for this wall, will be required for final review and approval of this request. And for the conceptual approval level of a review, staff finds that the materials proposed for the new addition to be appropriate and consistent with the design guidelines. However, a more detailed description of all materials, roof pitch, and window and door light configuration, as well as whether existing historic windows will be reused, will be needed for the final review and approval. Staff finds that the location of the proposed addition on the front of the house conflicts with the standards and guidelines. Typically, the front facade of a historic house is the primary elevation, and that which exhibits ornamentation and architectural features demonstrating its architectural style. In order to retain this architectural integrity and historic character of the front facade of contributing buildings, additions on the front facade are discouraged. However, the front facade of the subject house is not ornamented and expresses common architectural features, including a simply designed screen porch and undivided light windows. The deep front yard setback of this house and overall simplistic architectural design suggests that this structure may have been an accessory dwelling when the house was constructed, and while the subject property was combined with 718 Mississippi Avenue. Additionally, the design of the new addition is sympathetic to bungalow houses in the Lake Morton neighborhood and will result in a front yard setback that is more compatible with adjacent houses than the current building setback. And for these reasons, staff supports the conceptual design of the request. And finally, the building setbacks for the new addition meet the requirements of the Land Development Code. So staff recommends conceptual approval of the request with the following conditions. Number one, maintain side gabled orientation of the roof at the primary or current front facade. A gabled front porch tied into the side gabled roof is acceptable. Number two, use simple square columns or pair of square columns on each plinth to reflect the frame vernacular style instead of a tapered column, which is usually associated with the bungalow style. Number three, plans for final approval shall have the locations for all fenestration denoted. Number four, where possible, retain historic wood windows and openings and/or reuse historic wood windows in the new openings. Number 5, all new windows shall reflect a 1/1 light configuration to reflect the historic window pane pattern of the house. Number 6, remove decorative/false beams in the front gable. Number 7, new siding must match the exposure dimension of the original siding. And number 8, provide a complete list of all new exterior building materials and the roof pitch for the new addition. Final approval of this request by the Design Review Committee is necessary before a building permit can be issued. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And would the applicant like to speak in support of this request? If so, please come to the podium.
Good morning. I'm Wes Graham. My wife and I own the property, obviously, and I just wanted to say hi and introduce myself. We've had the property, like we said, for almost 5 years. We've had it as a rental, just so it as a background, and we're planning to make this our homestead. So, hence the reason why we're making this request. And if you happen to, I'm sure Tony will go more into this, but when you go into the property, we call it the ugly duckling because it really is kind of an ugly duckling. But we know there's lots of potential, and hopefully, with your help and approval, we'll be able to make those changes be a reality. So I'm here for answers, questions if I need to, but Tony's our guy.
Okay. Tony, did you have something to say about the project?
I think the house is, if you look at the house, it's really inconsistent with the other houses around the neighborhood, and also the dilapidation state, especially at the rear. The house is failing. I think we mentioned that in a couple of our notes.
Would you step closer to the mic?
But at the rear of the house, there is some dilapidation. There's some failure of the structure at the floor, so the house is really settling bad at the back. The front of the house is, like I mentioned before, is not consistent with most of the houses in the area. So we propose to remove the roof line, make a house that is more consistent with other houses in the area.
Okay.
Do you have any issue with staff recommendations?
No, ma'am. Maybe the first one. Can you bring that list back up again? ma'am? Sorry, I can't see.
It's the maintain side gabled orientation of the roof at the primary or current front facade. A gabled front porch tied into the side gabled roof is acceptable. That one?
So the maintain side gable orientation of the roof at the primary, is that maintain the existing side gable? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
So you're saying rotate the gable. So we have, right now, we have a front gable design.
Correct. The porch roof can be a front-facing gable.
Thank you, just the porch.
The porch,
Okay, so not
yeah.
the main span roof.
Correct. Yes, yeah.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
You would still have that jerkin head piece up there though as well, right?
Yes, sir.
Which piece?
What looks like a dormer, but it's really called a jerkin head roof.
At the main span, at the main roof.
John gets technical.
I know, it's terrible.
It's an architect's thing.
I learn something new every time I'm here. Okay, are there any public comments for support or opposition to the request from the audience? And it's silent. Okay, do the committee members have any questions for him?
I do.
Okay, go ahead.
I noticed that the entire house has kind of a splayed skirting. What are the materials proposed for the porch? Is it like going to be a brick raised foundation, or are you going to have the splayed skirting like the original porch, or?
Took my question.
Yeah.
It is very inconsistent around the entire house. I was curious what they plan to do to make that more uniform, especially since they're replacing a large portion of the home.
Yeah.
For the proposed?
Yeah, see where it's splayed skirting from the floor line down, and it splays out
sir.
from the plane of the walls of the.
We didn't go into those details, but I'm sure we can match what's here.
Okay.
Can you go back to the new elevation, Ms. Emily?
So on that front elevation, we would have the splayed skirting. Are we going to have the splayed skirting on the porch as well as the cheeks either side of the steps?
We did not intend that, but if it is the committee's, yes, sir, we will do it. Right now, we just had
I'd be happy
CMU painted, CMU and the front columns, we would extrude out beyond the porch, but going around the outside of the building, we did not splay it. Not on these concepts, no, sir.
Okay, and on the additions to the back, are you going to display it?
No, sir, we were not going to do that either. But if it's the committee's recommendation, we absolutely will.
Yeah.
It doesn't appear to be splayed on the rear.
No, the rears do not have it. But my question, I think specifically was addressing the front because, you know, often porches are done with like a pierced brick where the skirting is and you know, a brick. The two existing cheeks are brick, it looks like, coming out to the front, and that's what I was questioning is what kind of materials are we talking about there? And will it replicate something similar to the existing porch?
Looking at, well, yeah, I guess looking at multiple sides, it looks like half of the building may be splayed.
Right.
But going after that gable looks like it's not splayed at all around
Yeah,
the rest of
and
the
I'm
building.
specifically addressing the front porch is what I was more concerned about, was what are you doing there? I mean, I'd be happy with it being brick all the way up, but, you know, I don't know how the rest of the committee feels.
So we can splay the front and we can turn the sides back to the new side gables. Yes, sir. And then we don't have to do it around the back?
I would not think you would have to do it around the back, because the back is not that way already.
Yes, sir, correct.
Okay.
But we'll have a chance, I guess, a second shot at this when you bring it in for final approval?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Is there, I got a question, I guess. It's on the right elevation, I see there's just a little bump up in the roof line.
Correct, we didn't
Is that
expand
an
the
existing situation that's driving that?
No, sir, I don't think it is.
The one that's to the left, or it's called left, there's windows there. That's the dining room,
The conceptual right elevation.
the conceptual right elevation.
Yeah, I understand the left has a bump out that's existing, which is fine. It kind of gives an overall footprint that's consistent with a lot of the buildings.
Right. And
But I was
that's-
just curious with the bump, I don't see a bump out on the right, so I was kind of curious what that gable change is there on the roof line. Just kind of-
There's not an existing raised gable on the existing right side.
Not really projecting back to show in the front elevation because you wouldn't see if there was a gable there. So
Yeah,
kind of
I think it's just a drafting error.
We don't have a photo of the right side, right?
No.
I don't think we did around that corner.
We got a photo that's from the front that you can see at the back. It looks like it's just the fascia of the gable coming down that goes along the right side. Yeah, I see the conceptual front elevation doesn't show that little gable beyond, correct? Yes, sir. But it is there.
It is there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, yeah, because the rear elevation shows it, sort of.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, the guy just missed it on the front elevation.
All right.
Where are the vents front of the house?
What are the existing vents on the house?
Where are any vents?
Well, we're showing vents on the front and the back of the house, and we'll also have soffit vents. And with the new roof, ridge vents, I can't recall if they're allowed here in historic.
They are, as long as they're not visible
Okay, so we would put it on,
on the backside.
maybe on the back side of the house.
Yeah.
Is there any more public comment? Seeing no further public comment, let's go to the board portion of this, I believe. Actually, did I ask for
You already asked for the board input, that's why.
No, you asked for board questions.
board questions?
Then you
right.
close it for board discussion.
Okay, we're going to close it for questions and then open it for board discussion. Is there any discussion on this?
There's just one thing, and this is not specific just to this, but the recommendation to use historic windows at some point is going to come back and bite us with hurricane regulations and increasing storm issues and reusing existing, while, you know, I know it's protocol, it's what we do, but I think realistically, given what we've seen currently going on, we're going to have to rethink at some point our push to use,
We use
to
existing.
reuse from a sheer safety and hurricane preparedness situation. That's just a general
And
comment.
there are ways to upgrade existing windows to make them
But
more
would-
hurricane
but-
resistant, but yes.
You know what I'm saying? It's still
Yeah.
gonna be less than.
And I think with this project, it's a major rehabilitation. We don't know where new window openings will be going in. But as precedent, calls for reusing historic windows, that's why I included
It
it.
is. It's just a concerning thing at this point in time, I think,
Good
with
call.
any of our issues
Yeah.
that come up with windows and window replacement.
Yeah, 'cause-
Well, and I'm thinking it's really most appropriate on the front of the house, because we are trying to replicate
Yeah.
what would have been there had it been built this way. But certainly on the addition, you'd expect probably newer windows.
And to what you were saying, I mean, I frankly sustained, the high winds on the north side. Windows were shut and water was shooting up and under and, yeah, it was an interesting evening. So,
Just need to be mindful of that.
Right.
is there a motion, is there any other discussion, first of all? Is there a motion to approve?
I would move approval of the conceptual plan for the residents and would just ask that there be specific discussion of the skirting of the new porch.
And is that approval with the conditions listed by staff?
With staff conditions?
Yes, with staff conditions.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Thank you.
Second?
Okay, we are going to go to a roll call. Myself, approved. Chris Olson,
Approved.
Lynn Dennis,
Approve?
Landis Fleming,
Yes.
Jeremy Moses.
For the motion.
Yes.
Caesar's not here, and, no, I was looking for Caesar, and John White.
For the motion.
And we are approved. Congratulations.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, thank you. Our next case is HPB 22-210, 312 West Hancock Street. Final approval requested to maintain the window shutters applied to the front of the house at this address without a certificate of review. The owner applicant is Ms. Deidre Gilbert. Let's see. And are there any conflicts of interest among the committee members? Okay, seeing none. Emily, would you do the staff report and recommendations, please?
Yes, Madam Chair. So the subject property is an interior lot of record in the Dixieland subdivision and consists of 0.15 acres. The subject property contains a circa 1935 bungalow house, which is a non-contributing building in the Dixieland Historic District. Despite the age of the house, it was likely deemed non-contributing due to the many alterations affecting its integrity, including the front porch enclosure, addition of a side stoop, and many replacement windows. In 2019 and 2020, the subject house was completely rehabilitated, including the construction of a new addition at the rear of the structure, which was approved by the Design Review Committee. As part of the rehabilitation, decorative wood shutters were applied to 2 windows on the front facade. In June 2022, a complaint about the shutters not receiving a certificate of review was submitted to the City of Lakeland Citizens Action Center portal, which resulted in a code enforcement violation. Installation of the shutters was not indicated in the certificate of review application for the rehabilitation/addition that was approved by the committee in 2019. The applicant purchased the subject property in May 2021 and was notified of the code violation in July 2022. As the request indicates, the applicant wishes to retain the decorative window shutters as she feels this feature reflects the design of her house, and shutters are commonly found on houses in the Dixieland neighborhood. According to the applicant, each shutter is natural cedar with dimensions of 15 inches wide by 60 inches tall. The dimensions of the windows on which the pair of shutters are placed are 53 inches wide by 50.5 inches tall. And this request was evaluated using the standards and guidelines referenced. And while the request is not consistent with the guidelines referenced concerning the application of shutters to the windows of buildings in historic districts, Staff finds that the subject house is a non-contributing building and flexibility in design review can be permitted for minor alterations. Additionally, staff finds that shutters are placed on the wall of the enclosed front porch area, which is not original to the house, and the windows on which the shutters were placed on are not historic windows. Therefore, historic building fabric is not being adversely affected. The material of the shutters is compatible with the design guidelines, but the design is not a louvered and/or paneled shutter that would be used historically on a bungalow house. Additionally, shutters are not used uniformly on all windows of the subject house. However, given past precedent for the strict adherence to the specific design guideline referenced concerning window shutters by staff is unable to support the applicant's request and recommends removal of the shutters. So staff does recommend denial of the request as submitted. And this decision also was influenced by several cases recently in Dixieland where shutters have been applied. However, again, for the record, this is a non-contributing building.
Okay. Would the applicant like to say anything regarding, please come up.
Good morning, everyone.
Hello.
I am Deidre Gilbert. I am the homeowner of 312 West Hancock Street. This is my first home. I did not purchase this home with the knowledge of the Historic Committee, so it's very nice to meet all of you and go through this process. As I've been in correspondence with Emily for the past month and discussions, I do not want to remove the panels. Obviously, I purchased the home because of them. That was a part of what attracted me to it. I'm here to fight for keeping them. I do believe that my home brings beauty to the neighborhood. It's one of the nicer homes on the block. That is not to knock any other homes on the block, as they're all going through restoration right now. The entire Dixieland area actually is. The woman who is in charge of the construction company that renovated my home has renovated several homes in Lake Morton and Dixieland, Bridget Cruz, and she's actually been awarded for the work that she's done. So for me, I feel as though I'm just not in the space of understanding why they should be taken down, especially seeing as they've been there for several years. There was even a resident there prior to me, and this was never an issue. And now I'm here, and I am hoping that you guys see what I see.
Okay. Is there any public comment for support or opposition to the request from the audience? I'm personally concerned with the style of the shutter not working with the typical look. Like you would normally see it, like she said, the louvered type shutters around it rather than
The vertical panel.
like, you know, like your folding doors,
Yes,
the
yes.
louvered, exactly.
The image of as if it can be closed.
Oh, but just the single panel of it.
Correct.
And when I'm looking at this bottom right-hand photo, they look out of place because there are no shutters elsewhere on any of the windows, it appears. And so it looks like somebody said, oh, we have too much blue space here, let's fill it in. And so I personally don't think that they match the style of the home, the look of it, the feel, the historic feel of it.
It's to match the door. The shutters are the same color as the front door, but there's no image that's being displayed. There you go. That's where the aesthetic comes from. I think that is what the designer was trying to achieve, that balance.
On the fence on both sides.
Okay, I got,
Yeah.
maybe, okay, if I understand, you bought the house like this,
As is, correct.
okay?
I'm
What initiated
Complaint.
the,
A complaint came in.
A complaint came from whom?
It came from a resident in the neighborhood.
So if I drive through the Dixieland Historic where I live, and I make a list of all the ones that don't adhere, that's a
can do that in
ridiculous,
your off time.
that's a ridiculous situation to be in, to buy an existing house and wait for somebody to complain. I don't, that is a completely unfair. I do not see where the person in front of us violated anything.
Yeah.
And if we just go by every complaint, these gonna be 5-day-a-week, all-day reviews.
I understand what you're saying, and Ms. Gilbert had the same reaction as well. Unfortunately, well, I shouldn't say unfortunately, but the code enforcement staff does take every complaint seriously and investigates. And in this particular case, a strict interpretation of the design guidelines was applied to the shutters because, again, we've had a recent history of shutters being applied without approval. Again, this is a non-contributing house, flexibility can be applied, and that is certainly up to the committee to decide, but as staff, I felt I had a duty to provide a
Here's the
strict
thing.
interpretation.
Here's where we're missing this.
Yeah.
When the approval was given by the board as per, I think it was a per staff recommendation at the time.
In 2019.
In 2019.
Right.
When that was given, the guidelines were already set. Who goes in when the project is completed and verifies that the guidelines were followed?
I do, and I did a historical inspection on this,
And
however,
those shutters were not up?
I cannot remember. I was focused on the addition because
That's what we
See,
approved.
that's when.
it was the rear addition, so I remember driving in the alley to look at the rear addition, and I don't remember seeing
Okay.
the shutters.
There's where it needs to be caught, is to
Sorry.
deal with it upon completion.
Mm-hmm.
You know, all the rules will follow, everything's copacetic. If
Yeah.
it's not, then you make them do it then. You don't wait till someone comes and purchases the house and then has to come before us and
Always
has
puts
to
us
deal
in a
with.
catch-22 in that.
Right.
Yeah, it's a
right.
catch-22, but there has to be that end step where the completed project is signed off on.
Yes.
Or not.
Was it
Because
signed?
otherwise, we approve per staff recommendation.
Right.
If it just goes out and nobody's doing the follow-up to see that it's done.
Yeah.
They
Well,
could be
and
doing anything.
the historical inspection was completed by me, and the rear addition met all of the design guidelines that you approved. So it was finalized. That final inspection didn't include shutters, so I wasn't even looking for that feature.
So I have correspondence between myself and Ms. Foster, and that was the very first question that I asked. I'm like, I'm inheriting this, and this is all very new to me. If these were unacceptable or did not meet code, how is it that the house has been standing with these panels for the past almost 3 years now? And there was a resident there prior to me, and it was never an issue. Her response to me was, regrettably, she did not catch them. But at the end of the day, she gave the final approval of the overall design of the home.
But we don't know particularly that they were there
No, they
at the time that she was doing this.
But I have the correspondence between myself, Ms. Foster, as well as the woman who headed the renovation, and it states that they were there.
They were there, okay.
I have a whole different angle on this too. They are also inappropriate in scale. Normally shutters are considered to be like an operable shutter that would at least be half as wide as the window, or be a bifold shutter that would be a quarter the width of the window, and would be mounted across the trim, not outside the trim. So there's a real problem with whether or not these were there in the beginning, the scale of those particular shutters. And so I don't know how we're going to address those kinds of things moving forward particularly on a non-contributing house.
When did you purchase this?
May of 2021,
Okay, and this construction,
Was it 20?
2019,
Yep.
2022.
2019.
No
There was someone
complaints
that
for
lived
2
there
years.
a year and a half
No
prior to me
complaints for 2
purchasing.
years.
Everyone was inside their house, not.
We were shuttered in.
Emily, were there any other, like, electronic public comments followed up on this?
No. Public comment.
Unfortunately, I feel that you're probably a victim of the recent happenings with this board of other similar items coming up. And it's kind of, unfortunately for us and the board, it's kind of a gotcha moment because I personally, when I read this, felt that this is possibly someone testing to see whether we're consistent with their guidelines, in which case they might pursue other means to overrule what they consider capricious and non-consistent enforcement of our rules.
I just don't feel like they fit. They're
They're out of scale.
with this type of window, it just doesn't work.
What would work? You tell me, what would work?
The louvered shutters put on either side, I know I did it, they're not horribly expensive. I mean, they're not terribly cheap, but they're not excessive. And those are very easy to install as well. And the fact that they're just on the front and they don't have at minimum that side window right there just really makes it
Out of place.
out of place. It just doesn't feel, it doesn't have that historic look. And so you bought the house in, sorry,
May of 2021.
May of 21, and what date did you send the notification that this wasn't per?
July.
Yeah, July
2022.
2022 was the complaint.
So
Okay, if
Emily-
you change
Emily-
those shutters and make them twice as wide or half as wide as the window, what's it gonna look like?
Well, no, I'm saying you could have a bifold shutter. And in a true shutter, you can have bifold shutters, and so it could be a quarter as wide. And that's probably more appropriate for what these are, but they're not mounted correctly either. They're put outside the trim. They should be mounted so that they would be hinged to close on the window.
So now the home,
I know they're decorative, but that's what I'm
They're
saying. So
correct.
why would we approve just decoration that someone decided to add to a house as opposed to something that's appropriate for the house?
well, the home directly across the street from me has black panels outside of the paneling of the window. It's exactly the same. So I'm trying to figure out how mine is such an eyesore, but that one is not.
But what kind of, are they exactly?
They are black, but they're the layered, yes, that you are suggesting. If I am able to find something that is cedar in that style, is that acceptable? Would that be more appealing for the panel?
I think that the louvered look would much better fit.
What
and-
color?
Or just take them off.
Cedar, like it is.
The cedar color.
Either louvered or paneled are both acceptable design.
Okay.
Yeah, because the door is paneled. And if you're trying to say you're matching the door, you'd make it a paneled shutter probably.
So paneled or louvered?
So Emily, the house that we actually had almost identical shutters removed from was a historic contributing home.
Yeah.
It was a contributing home, and that's the difference with this particular case.
And it's also stated that there's a little more flexibility in design alterations for my home,
Exactly.
if I'm not mistaken.
Is this the one where the right side front window actually kind of had a wall behind it where there was a walk-in closet?
Yes, I think it was on the other side of the house, though.
It
not
was
not the side
partially
that's
the
facing
front
us.
and the right-hand side.
Yes, because I recall that conversation with Ms. Cruz at that time.
Okay.
And the committee.
Like a Palermo, something, what was, Paramount?
No,
That doesn't matter,
Yeah.
but, I mean, and now what about just taking them off completely? Is that,
That's
He
okay.
can, he can see
appropriate-
my face. That will take away from the entire aesthetic of the design. I'm willing to most certainly work with you guys to replace them with acceptable shutters.
And I agree about the aesthetic part, but that was just a
thought.
a free possibility versus going and getting different shutters. For me personally, the louvered or the panel ones, even in the cedar, would be much more appropriate for this. And the height of the louvers, do they normally go up to that top, or are they shorter?
No, the
I mean,
shutters,
The shutters.
yeah, the height of the shutters is fairly appropriate. It should simply just cover the window area, not the trim.
Yeah. If it were a real shutter, it would just cover the window. It would not cover the trim.
But on the decorative ones, don't they go beside?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
they're just mounted to the
Okay. I
cladding.
was gonna say, that's what I had on mine, and I'm like, I was like, wait a minute.
You can have them either way.
And I think the other thing too is the design of the shutter for the structures that were built in the time period, though I know this is not contributing, but that are in the area. That is not a style that you find. I'm not saying,
the-
but
yeah,
it's more of a rustic ranch house type of style than it is
Historic,
yeah,
vintage.
Exactly.
I get
vintage.
it. I get it.
Yeah.
In other words, get some horses and put it in your side.
Well, I think the problem is too, is unfortunately you're in a spot because we've had a dozen of similar situations just like this that were unfortunate, in their defense, or in our defense, they were contributed buildings most of the time, and yours is not contributing, that we have made decisions on that they may be looking at your house, like you said, as a, well,
Right.
if you just told us no on this one, what about that one?
Without
And
the
then
understanding that mine
it's
is
like not your fault
contributing.
100%. And
I still got a problem driving up and down these streets.
And complaining about that.
And I've had international guests, they like the variety we've got. They don't like where every home, including some of these subdivisions, they got $500,000 and $600,000 houses that all look the same.
Yeah, cookie cutter.
Okay.
Yep.
The thing they like about most of Lakeland is the variety.
Agreed.
That is one of the nicer looking houses in that area. So unless we're gonna tell everybody else to come up to the standard we put for this, I think we're out of line. I don't think it's, now had she put those on there, I'd have a different perspective,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but she didn't.
But would you agree that the louvered or paneled would fit
That-
better? Or you just don't have a problem with it?
I built too many houses, my wife designed, never one time did we agree on that type of thing.
Okay, so we'll just agree to disagree.
She won most of the time.
Emily, can I ask just a whole different question? Is this considered non-contributing just because they've closed in the front porch?
Yes,
That's the
that-
only reason it's really non-contributing. It really is an older house.
It is an older house, and also the reconfiguration of the front door opening, which was likely on the original front.
Right, it would have
Facade.
been on the front of the house and is now on the side of the house, which is kind of odd as well, but that's, that's,
and the reason why we allowed larger or smaller windows was because it was non-contributing, like the size of the window openings on the
I don't
front.
think we
Those-
allowed it. I
No,
think
those
it
were
happened before
done,
we
I
were-
believe, prior to
Okay.
the Dixieland designation, so.
Yeah, I think it,
Because I think part of the scale issue that everyone's having too is that the windows are obviously smaller when you look at it from an angle right now. So it automatically makes that side look different than the other side. And then your eye goes straight to the shutters, and then you're like, that's the problem. But I don't know if that's technically the problem.
yeah,
you know?
the problem is the windows too.
There's lots of,
Yeah.
lots of little
And
things.
it's non-contributing because of all of that.
Right.
But it also, in consideration of the entire neighborhood, it's, do we ever let people double down on non-contributing features that detract even more away from the historic nature of our neighborhoods?
I think my house is one of the most attractive in the neighborhood.
Oh, I don't disagree. I would love if I had a few more houses that look like this on my block. But again, it's kind of a question of, do we let people double down on things that don't
Right, are we,
fit in that historic nature? Because
are we prepared to allow lots of these to come through and accept them the same
Exactly,
exact
because
way?
then we get to the slippery slope of then someone who is a contributing home is going to come back again and say, you allowed it on this home over here, and we're going to continually have this argument. So it's kind of a question of, where do we put the line? Is it because she's a non-contributing home, or do we sit there and say that it's just the incorrect style for the style of home, which I think is a much more tenable argument to have with people, of that we would like it to match the style of the home. You don't put shutters on necessarily like a Spanish style home. It fits on a bungalow or a plantation. A frame vernacular wouldn't necessarily have shutters like this. It would have, my home, when I looked up the report for my home, had awnings on top of it. They don't have it anymore, but it had awnings on top. So it's just consistent with the style of that particular home. I think that's a more tenable argument than whether it's contributing or not, because then we get into the, have we doubled down on someone in the past who did something that wasn't right, and then we're question of, I don't want to punish you for something that someone previously did.
I don't want to be punished for that.
Well, I have another question, Emily. Because they are purely decorative, if someone were to hang a flag or something else on the outside of their house, that could easily be taken down with a few nails or screws or something like that. Could this be considered decoration, just like a piece of artwork would be, or
I think that's a stretch.
Well, I'm just saying that, I mean, I don't see where someone could say, these could easily be taken down in 10 minutes, and so could a piece of artwork, or so could something else, if it's purely decorative. And it's not, in your analysis, said that it's not adversely impacting any of the historic features of the house or any of the, so I'm just asking from a standpoint of where the next argument could possibly come from.
Right. Just in comparing like a flag to a shutter, because our design guidelines specifically call out shutters as, needing to be consistent with the architectural style of the home, and at least appear operable. That's where we draw the line. The design guidelines don't call out any other decorative features like flags.
Maybe like I think from the last one with the shutters was the sign and the grass. If they were to hang that on the wall, next to the window, would that kind of potentially, would that be something we would say to take down if it was a different size, too big, too large of a
No, not really, because, our design guidelines do reference address numbers. That one's kind of on a,
I'm just trying to feel out, like, if we were to approve or disapprove, like, where the next,
And I understand where you're coming from.
where the next kind of iteration
And,
of.
again, our guidelines are just that. They are guidance. They are not written in stone rules. So they are subject to interpretation, and that is the job of the committee.
If I could just add to the conversation too, the last time this came up, I mean, there was more than just shutters. I mean, it was, they moved the door, there was an entire renovation that had not gone through the process. Whereas this is one that appears that it did, but there was just an inadvertent
Oversight
on not seeing the shutters at the time, which from a legal standpoint, it does create a potential issue for if the city were to try to enforce the code against someone where it had been previously approved. It's called equitable estoppel. There is a fair argument that could be made that the city approved this by, even if it was a mistake, and therefore it would not be fair to impose a code violation against someone in that situation. And of course, that would be a decision for the code board if it went that route. But I'm just bringing it to your attention. This is different than the last one we saw, where shutters were an issue on many levels. The non-contributing factor, the approval question. There's lots of ways to distinguish this from what the board had seen before.
So that's where my heart was, and I was going to ask you to if you had an opinion as well.
Well, we let someone keep windows that were the entire house had all new windows in it that weren't. And then we're pretty lenient when it comes to if it's happened before you purchased it. And in the past, we've been pretty, but it's just a small, it's a cheaper fix than the windows, and-
Oh, yeah, sure.
I would just,
But, Madam Chair, I'm sorry, that, I don't think it would be appropriate for you to be presenting evidence to.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Melinda.
I'm sorry about that.
No, that's fine, that's fine.
So I had a question with regards to what you said with that. So typically, as John, myself, and Caesar in the architectural world would know, like when we give documents to the city that kind of lay out our design, whether it's through here at the Historic Board or CRA, LDDA, all the various arms of the commission with that, typically that becomes kind of a contract, and whether they recognize the deviation or not, it becomes a question of when is it noticed, because it's simply seen as a deviation at one point or another, and we can bring it up. I can bring up deviations a year later after a building is designed. We go back and we finally saw it because sometimes the building's too large or just wasn't done through that particular process. So in this regard is when, if that was not part of essentially the contract that the previous owner did with us, how would that play? And then follow up to that is also was brought about because it was called essentially as a code enforcement violation. That's how it was brought to the attention. So there's two aspects of we didn't notice it, but then also is with Landis's concern of if it's a code violation, how do we address it at that point? Because the code violation was called that it wasn't reviewed. And then in that case, well, yeah, it wasn't reviewed.
I'd like to make a motion.
We're not there yet.
So we're not there yet?
No, we're still on the public portion.
Well, we should.
You are very much appreciated.
Yeah, we should shift.
So, any other questions from the public? If we can close that part and now go to the board discussion section of it.
I have a question for Emily. On the 2019 application, did they show a front elevation of the house?
I would have to go back and look at the plans to make sure, but my recollection is no.
So there was never any discussion about whether or not there would be any change to the front of the house?
Correct.
Oh, that's interesting too.
So in that case, it's not
During
a
the-
case of whether it was in the certificate of review. It's more, I would view it more as this is someone calling in a code violation of something that should have been reviewed.
Right.
Was
and
not.
was not.
I will say that during the DRC presentation, in the PowerPoint presentation, there were images of all four sides of the house. So the existing condition of the house, so that the board would be, or excuse me, the committee would be familiar with what the home looked like. Again, I'd have to go back and look at the case file, but I don't believe there was a front elevation shown.
Okay.
Okay, so,
An answer? Questions?
Well, there was a lot of layers to that, so I'm not sure exactly what the question was. I guess the way I would answer it is that, it sounds like, technically speaking, according to the design guidelines, this style of shutter is not appropriate in the way that the design guidelines address this style of home and these types of shutters. It also sounds like maybe they weren't specifically part of the previous application, and so they may have been applied during that renovation nonetheless, but that would have been, I guess, what you're calling a deviation. There's still, that doesn't completely eliminate the question of from an estoppel standpoint, whether or not the city should have caught it at the time or not. I mean, obviously, Emily's position would be she wasn't there to review that, and so she didn't see it because it wasn't part of her scope of review. And then the homeowner's position would be, well, you were there, you were approving it. There is some case law on these types of situations, where, the case I'm thinking of was a setback, and the city went and they re-roofed, an accessory structure, and the city approved the roofing permit for a building that was in violation of a setback. And then later, when they did a code enforcement sweep to enforce the setback rules, the homeowners argued, hey, you've been out here, we've permitted things on this building. Nobody's ever brought up the setback issue until now. Why now? This isn't fair. And ultimately the court agreed with them that even though the inspectors were out there looking at the roof, the city had approved several projects on that property over the years, and that should have come up at some point if the city officials were out there, and that was the court's opinion. And the elements of estoppel are basically that if somebody justifiably relies on the position of the other party, then and they invest based on that reliance, then it would be unfair to pull the rug out from under them is an analogy that the courts use a lot. So I don't know if it applies here. I mean, it would not be a question for this board. And this board is just to apply the design guidelines or to give some flexibility from those guidelines when you think that it's fair and the situation calls for it. The question of whether or not the city could actually, order the removal of the shutters because they violate the design guidelines, that would be a question for the code enforcement board if it went that route.
So if we were to approve these, but it then went before code enforcement could say no?
No. If you approve these, then there's no issue.
Oh, okay.
But if you don't approve them and she still refuses to take them down, then it becomes a code enforcement issue. Mm-hmm. Or if you approve some other type of shutter and she doesn't comply with that direction, then it would become a code enforcement issue. Okay. And then the code enforcement board would have to decide whether or not estoppel applies here and the approval covers the shutters or not.
I think that we need to make a decision that works equitably and easily and forget all the
I'm with Landis on this.
legalese.
They're not hurting anything. They're not detracting historically from the material. It's not fair to the homeowner, and if we get challenged in the future on this, this was a one-off.
Yeah, I
This
think there's,
situation is a one-off situation.
I think there's fewer opportunities for people to have, I think the chances of this happening isn't quite as often as what we may think, just because we've seen the fact that someone did something that snuck past Emily, and then sold the house to a new person, and then that person got it, and then there was a complaint, and then they make it to here. I think that may not happen quite as often as we think, but it will happen.
I think we can say just in conversation to Ms. Gilbert that the style that we would prefer to see are either the panel or the louvered. It would be more appropriate and fit better with the neighborhood. I mean, the cedar fine, but it's just, to make it more appealing. I think it then would be left to her, if she's agreeable to doing
I would not
something
mind doing
like
that. I just don't want to lose them altogether.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Could they be literally just turned around and remounted? And then we'd just have
I have
four
no
vertical
idea.
boards?
I have my dad here. He
The authority.
Oh, Dad.
Are you just thinking you just want to see the linear board?
Yeah, you'd see just the linear boards and it would be more appropriate like the door. If you just
I
flipped
see
them
what you mean,
around.
just a clean.
I mean, you're undoing.
Sort of the farmhouse style,
Yeah.
with the horizontal.
I mean, it's the style of the shutter that's most objectionable, I
Yeah,
think.
I think that's what set the
Yeah,
neighbor off.
and
or
I
whatever it was.
completely understand. I do. I just don't want to lose them altogether. If there's an alternative to replacing or anything like that, I'm willing to work with you guys. I just don't want to feel as though I purchased my first home and now I'm being bombarded to destroy it.
And maybe
I
some,
move that we grant the request of the applicant
As is.
As is.
as is.
I really like.
Her request.
Second.
Okay, we're,
Discussion.
yeah,
two.
yeah, is there any further discussion? Personally, the flipping them around to the backside, if that's just the straight boards, is something that would make me say yes rather than no. As they stand, the aesthetic of them is just off. So we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All in favor, actually, we've got to do this by roll call. Melinda Rinker, I'm going to say no as is. Chris Olson,
yes.
Lynn Dennis,
For the motion?
Landis Fleming,
Yes,
Jeremy Moses,
For the motion?
John White.
No,
Okay, so that's what, 2-4
4-2.
to 2. So it passes? Okay.
You're approved. But we hope that you will work.
I will work on it, yes. I'll probably be returning because I would like to put a partition between, in the front yard, because of the way that the house has been renovated. The front of my home is the backyard of my neighbor. So when I open my blinds every morning, I'm looking in their backyard, you know? So I'd like to put something, and I mentioned that to Emily, and she's helping me to understand the process. So I will possibly see you guys again.
Okay.
In doing that, that's not something that can be administratively approved then as well?
It can be likely.
Okay,
if it's,
all right.
you know,
So you may not
I
have to
can't
come back
imagine
and
it
see
would
us.
be.
Emily may take care of it for you.
Thank you. That's even better.
We really are nice.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Is there anything else?
No.
No.
Gilbert, thank you for your patience.
No
I
problem.
appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a
And
good day, you
with
guys.
that, thank you very much. With that, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
second.
Okay, and all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Don't anybody? No. Thank you for making my second one